Welcome to the Global Sports Channel. My name's Mark and it's great to have you all with us today. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please, and hit the little bell notification button. You'll be advised then every time we drop a video. Now, on today's video, we're going to be talking about cricket. Yes, the Ashes from Australia. And as a New Zealand neutral, I'm very interested about what's going on in the Ashes series today. And I've got to say, there's been a whole lot of gloom and doom from the English press and the English supporters and a lot of people in the world of cricket, right over to Ian Botham, who's out in Australia at the moment as part of the commentary team for Channel 7. And I'm going to take a slightly different view on this today with the Ashes series from Down Under. So let's get stuck into the video and have a chat about it. So first of all, I want to go back to the first test in Brisbane, and this was I guess a series that was really hyped up about a lot of things that were going to happen and whether or not England could finally take over Australia's championship position in Australia, because it's very difficult for any team to go to Australia and have a success in any test series against Australia. The conditions, both in the heat and the hardness of the wickets, is something that takes teams a lot of time to get used to, and they're not used to batting and bowling on these types of pitches all across different parts of the world. So I want to bring up the Brisbane test because I think one of the main issues that the English team are currently facing in Australia is their lack of preparation. And there was a lot of rain around the Queensland area leading into the Brisbane test, and after the English players had to go through the dealings with COVID and isolation and quarantining and all that process, which, let's not underestimate the impact that has on individuals when you're going through a process. And I'm not making this video today to try and come up with a million excuses for the English cricket team. What I'm doing though is maybe offering a different dimension and perspective than what everybody else seems to be focused on in the press around the world and sports fans online at the moment. So the lead up to the first test in Brisbane wasn't good for the English cricket team. Doesn't matter how you want to look at it. Some of the players have come and played in Australia before, but it's a new series, it's a new tour, we're in COVID times, and things are very, very different. So leading into that first test, both of the English warm-up games were literally washed out, and the English batters and bowlers had very, very little time to adapt and adjust to the Australian conditions. So I think what we're starting to see now in this series is we're seeing that being a large part of the impact on why the series has unfolded the way that it has now. Would the results be any different? I don't know. I don't think so, but I'm not saying that it's the only reason England have performed badly. I think there's a lot of other issues that we've got to look at, but I think it's one of the issues that's not being talked about enough as a relevant topic for the reasons why the English team weren't hitting the ground running, so to speak, in that first test in Brisbane. But today I want to solely focus on the Melbourne test, the Boxing Day test, the very famous Boxing Day test. And no matter who you are around the world as a cricket fan, the Boxing Day test in Melbourne is a significant event. And for those players that were selected in the first ever test team representing their country, or getting to play in the Melbourne cricket ground for the first time, this is a huge ordeal, and it's something that should also be very well recognised and appreciated, because it's something like walking out into centre court at Wimbledon, or walking out onto the main golf course at St Andrews for a golfer. It's a mecca for the world of sport, and to have that massive crowd coming into the Melbourne cricket ground on Boxing Day really does offer you a different dimension. If you've never been to the Boxing Day test and you are a cricket fan and you're living around the world somewhere, make sure you put it on your bucket list and try and get there throughout your lifetime, because you will actually experience something that you can't experience anywhere else. And I'm not saying it's the best place in the world to watch cricket, because Lords and Headingley and a lot of other places around the world are great places to watch cricket, but the Melbourne cricket ground on Boxing Day is a very, very special place. Okay, so going into the test, and England ended up batting in the first innings, and I guess there was a lot of apprehension around the English batting lineup after what had happened in both Brisbane and in Adelaide. So Joe Root had come out in the press, as had many of the English players and coaches, and talked about, you know, being more determined and more fierce. heading into this third test in Melbourne on Boxing Day. But again, something else that hasn't been talked about a lot since the test finished yesterday has been the actual pitch that these guys have been playing on. Now, the Melbourne curator for the Melbourne wicket has been in place now for 4 years, and he made a statement and a position on making the pitch much more competitive when it comes to bowling and batting over the future years. And on the last 4 years, he's made a concerted effort to change the texture of that Melbourne pitch and to give the bowlers a lot more of a chance during the Melbourne Test match, because we've seen the Melbourne Test wicket usually be a flat belter for 4 days out of 5 days in that Test match, and it hasn't really given the bowling side much of a chance. But this year we've seen the combination of all those changes coming to fruition, because it does take, from researching and understanding the wicket terminology, it takes about 3 or 4 years for a pitch to really evolve and to develop and to mature. So this is the 4th year that this pitch is being used. It's a drop-in pitch, and that in itself has its own nuances and idiosyncrasies that have to be dealt with when actually creating a pitch. So this drop-in pitch was used for in its 4th year of operation, and what we saw on day 1 of this match was incredible amount of grass. In fact, we saw 12 millimeters of grass on this pitch, which is really unheard of for a Melbourne pitch. Now, this is sort of the kind of texture that we get in a pitch in Brisbane or in Perth, in fact, and those two pitches are recognised as Australia's fastest and most bouncy pitches. So we already knew from the beginning, from day 1, that we were going to see this pitch actually performing in different characteristics that we've seen it over the years in Melbourne. And of course we did see that on the first day. We saw a lot of life coming out of the pitch. We saw a lot of sideways movement, not a lot of seam, but we did see a lot of bounce as well. And the Australian bowlers, who at this stage in their trajectory are a very good bowling unit, and they've used a number of fast bowlers in this series so far, and each one of those bowlers have outstanding talents in different areas, and they've all been able to extract the maximum out of these pitches. And the reason why they're able to do that constantly in Australia is that these are their home pitches. They know as well how to bowl on these pitches as Jimmy Anderson knows how to bowl on English wickets. It's exactly the same scenario in Australia for these Australian bowlers. So it doesn't matter if someone like Scott Boland is coming in for his first ever test match. He's been brought up his entire life bowling on these pitches, and he knows what to do on these pitches. So that's something else that's really important to take into consideration when we're assessing this whole overall English cricket team performance. Now, on day 1, we saw the English batters go out and have a lot of trouble on this pitch because of the length and line that the Australian bowlers were bowling, and we've seen that consistently now throughout the series. And that's something that the English batters have not been able to adjust to. And we've seen the English batters being caught out by rapidly rising balls outside their off stump, whether to leave, whether to go for it, and we've seen an extraordinary amount of catches behind, and we've seen a lot of LBWs and bowls as well against the English batsmen. So the only person that really looked comfortable in the English first innings was Joe Root, and he got to 50 fairly comfortably, but he didn't go on and make a big score. And we all know that Joe Root is the centre core of the actual English cricket team, and if he doesn't score any big runs, then the rest of them are going to struggle, and that's exactly what we saw. So no matter the fatter of Butler and Stokes and these people coming in, we didn't see them press on and get a big score. So England were all out for 180 in the first innings. We knew that wasn't going to be enough, but we also didn't know how Australia was going to bat on this wicket. And it was really interesting to see when the English started bowling against the Australians in their first innings. And if we go through the English bowling attack, we saw that Stuart Broad was left out for this test, and we had Jimmy Anderson coming in. It was great to see Mark Wood coming back into the English test team as well. No one knows why he was left out for Adelaide Test, but he came back, and he's a genuine threat, fast bowler who puts a lot of effort into his bowling, and once again he performed really, really well. But what we saw in the Australian first innings in Melbourne was the resurgence of Jimmy Anderson, and it was fantastic to see this 39-year-old fast bowler really on song and finding the right length to bowl. And I think what happened after the Adelaide test is the English attack sat down and really talked about the line and length they were bowling to the Australian attack. And again, I go back to their lack of practice and preparation before that Brisbane test, where they weren't able to have this experience and understand exactly where they needed to pitch these balls. Now, if you haven't played the sport of cricket before, it's a lot different sitting in the nets and doing net practice than it is getting out into the middle in real world conditions and actually playing in a match. So no matter how many overs you bowl or how many balls you bowl in a net practice, it's nothing like getting out into the middle and experiencing that true wicket that's in the ground. So that's what a lot of the issues, I believe, surrounded the English cricket team. So we had Jimmy Anderson performing really, really well. I really like Ollie Robinson as a bowler. I think he's got a lot of potential, this young guy. He's tall, he drops the ball down from a great height, and he's also very consistent with his length and line as well. And he's a bit like Josh Hazel. He plays the role that Josh Hazelwood does in the Australian team. So he's a guy that can come in, keep the pressure on from one end while you've got your strike bowler doing the damage like Jimmy Anderson did at the other end. So I really like Ollie Robinson. I don't think the English selectors should be mucking around with him at this stage. I think he should be a guy that should be embraced, developed, given the time to nurture, and I think England are going to really reap some great rewards out of that guy. Mark Wood as well. I think this guy will bowl all day long, and he throws it in there at 140 to 150 kilometres an hour. And no matter where you are in the world, that is going to give a good test to any batsman if you can bowl consistently at that speed on a good line and a good length. So I think the fact that Jimmy Anderson really found his mojo in Melbourne helped the English bowling attack go forward. I think it also helped the English cricket team in general in terms of lifting up their mojo a little bit. What we saw at the back end of the Australian first innings with the tail enders getting a few runs, I think that hurt England psychologically more than anything. And Australia probably ended up a little bit fortunate because Marcus Harris ended up getting 79 runs, and I think that was a little bit fortunate. I think he had a couple of scenarios where he could have as easily gone out, where balls didn't fall to fielders, etc. And if you take away those 79 runs, then we have a lot closer scenario going into that second innings. So of course we're all now talking about the demise of the English batting order in the second innings in Melbourne, and yeah, a lot of it has to do with poor selection of shots for sure, but also a lack of grit and determination to stay in there. But I go back to what I started off in saying in this video, is I just really believe that the English batsmen and bowlers have been underdone going into this series, and they haven't found their mojos yet. Now, we saw their bowling attack really come together in the first innings in Melbourne. It was a shame that their batters didn't set some kind of a target for Australia to chase, because I saw trouble in that wicket for the Australian batsmen as well. And we saw it throughout their innings. You know, Labuschagne and Smith both failed in the context of their own careers, but they failed on this pitch, and this pitch is extremely difficult to play on for a batter. So if a bowler is bending their back, putting in a good line and length, then the results are going to be there. And we saw that in the Australian first innings, and we saw it obviously in the English second innings. So unfortunately, the Englishmen didn't get enough runs to force Australia to bat again, and we didn't really see whether the English bowlers were going to be able to put Australia under any kind of pressure. Because I tell you what, if England had got a lead of around about 175, I think it would have been really, really a different match in Melbourne because of that wicket. So I just wanted to make this video today to talk about that, because I think there's been a lot of doom and gloom out there from English spectators and everybody in the press about how poorly England play. I think we can't take away some of that actual fact, but I think also we've got to go back to the beginning of this tour. And I was in Queensland leading up to this tour. There was a lot of rain around. It disrupted all of the English preparation going into this. And when they walked out onto the Gabba on that first day, and it was overcast and gloomy, there was obviously a lot of red flags and warning signs there that the English were going to find it hard to deal with the Australian bowling attack. And once they get on top, momentum in sport is a fantastic thing, and that's what we've seen throughout this series. So do I think England are going to bounce back in Sydney at the Sydney Test? Well, let's first of all hope and pray that the Sydney Test is actually going to go ahead with the COVID situation in Australia at the moment, like it is around the rest of the world. We're not too sure what's going to happen. But I do expect to see England go up another level again in Sydney. And some people will say, well, that's not going to be hard to do given what happened in Melbourne. But come on, let's give them a little bit of a break. I think the pressure is now off because they've lost the series. they can go into the Sydney Test with a little bit more of a relaxed attitude. And I think we're going to see, both from the batting and the bowling lineups, a different English result in Sydney. Now, you can bet your bottom dollar that Australia's not going to give up here. They're going to want a 5-0 whitewash of this series. So they're not going to take their foot off England's neck in this series. So there's not going to be any quarter given to the Englishmen. They're going to have to earn it. But I think we are going to see probably a changed team from England, unfortunately, because they're not going to stick with some of these players who haven't done so well. And we're going to see a new attitude where England's going to continue to fight. So I wouldn't be surprised if both in in the fourth test in Sydney and also in the fifth test in Hobart, we're going to see a different result from England, because I think they're going to be that further into the tour. They're going to come to terms a little bit better with bowling and batting on these Australian wickets, and we're going to see a different result. So there we go. Before we write everybody off in the English cricket community, think about some of those things that I've just talked about, because I think we need to have somewhat of a more balanced conversation around this. Put yourself in their shoes. Have you played for England, represented England? Maybe you'd say that you'd probably do a better job. Well, if that's the case, why don't you get out there and give it a go? Thanks for watching the Global Sports Channel. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, hit the little subscribe button, and I'll be back again soon with some more videos. Until then, stay safe, stay well everyone, and we'll see you again soon.